The Cambodian Civil War formed part of the complex geopolitical theater of tumultuous Indochina during the first half of the 1970s, particularly in reference to the Vietnam War, which greatly affected the security climates of adjacent countries, including Cambodia. In 1970, severe economic problems in Cambodia prompted the military to overthrow Prince Norodom Sihanouk, Cambodia's ruling monarch, whose faulty policies led to widespread discontent among the Cambodian people. Prince Sihanouk, although extremely popular among Cambodians and revered as a semi-deity, applied the dangerous foreign policy of playing up the superpowers in order to get the best deal for Cambodia and still maintain neutrality. Years earlier, Prince Sihanouk had willingly received military and financial assistance from the United States. But in 1965, after deciding that communism would ultimately prevail in Indochina, he opened diplomatic relations with China and North Vietnam. Further, he accepted military and economic support from North Vietnam. In return, he allowed the North Vietnamese army to use areas of eastern Cambodia in its war against South Vietnam. However, the Vietnamese presence in Cambodia fueled the centuries-old acrimonious relationship between the Cambodian people against their eastern neighbors. Anti-Vietnamese protests broke out in Phnom Penh, the Cambodian capital. Consequently, in 1970, military leaders and top government officials deposed Prince Sihanouk, who was away from the country at that time. Prince Sihanouk did not return to Cambodia, but sought and was granted sanctuary in China. The coup's leader, Prime Minister Lon Nol, formed a government that wanted to keep Cambodia from any involvement in the Vietnam War. But as the Vietnam War continued to spill over into Cambodia, Lon Nol turned to his traditional backer, the United States, which began to infuse his regime with large amounts of military and financial assistance. With the American money, Cambodia built a huge army, comprising mainly fanatical recruits who held anti-Vietnamese sentiments. However, Lon Nol's regime was weak and the military was plagued with corruption and ineptitude. Cambodian forces also lacked combat experience. These factors would prove fatal in the coming war. Operating from the Cambodian northeast mountains, the Khmer Rouge was an unknown insurgent group that wanted to turn Cambodia into a communist state. After being endorsed by the deposed Sihanouk, who wanted to return to power, and provided weapons by China, the Khmer Rouge quickly grew in numbers, power, and influence. In the early years of the Cambodian Civil War, from 1970 to 1972, the Khmer Rouge had little military capability. During this time, its battles against the Cambodian government were fought mainly by its North Vietnamese allies, who were also alarmed by Lon Nol's pro-American regime in Cambodia. As a result, North Vietnam also wanted to overthrow the pro-American Lon Nol regime. In May 1970, a major North Vietnamese army offensive captured a sizable portion of eastern Cambodia. The attack came to within 15 miles of Phnom Penh before being driven back by the Cambodian army. Then in June 1970, American and South Vietnamese army units counterattacked and drove the North Vietnamese further away to the north. Later that month, in June 1970, the North Vietnamese attacked again, this time capturing the entire northeastern third section of the country, which was subsequently turned over to the Khmer Rouge for occupation and control. In April 1971, the Cambodian army launched its only major offensive of the war, taking the northern city of Kampong Thom that had fallen earlier to the communists. However, the city was retaken in December 1971 by the Khmer rebels, which they then held for the rest of the war. By 1972, the Khmer Rouge had assembled an army of 35,000 full-time soldiers and 100,000 irregulars. It received massive military support from China, directed its own battles, and was completely self-reliant. The North Vietnamese turned over operational command to the Khmer Rouge and then withdrew from Cambodia in order to fight its own war against South Vietnam. By this time, relations between Prince Sihanouk and the Khmer Rouge had soured because of ideological differences. The Khmer rebels also wanted to rule Cambodia themselves and not reinstate the former ruler. By early 1973, the Khmer Rouge was more than a match for the Cambodian army. The Khmer rebels cut off communication lines north and south of Phnom Penh and began their advance toward the capital. Only a massive aerial bombardment of their positions by American bombers saved Phnom Penh, forcing the Khmer rebels to retreat to the countryside. However, by June 1973, the Khmer Rouge, after capturing many other Cambodian regions, held over 60% of the country. And by January 1975, as American military involvement in Indochina was winding down, the Khmer rebels had encircled Phnom Penh and were starting the final assault on the capital. By this time, the city had fallen into chaos, with thousands of refugees from the countryside swelling the urban population. A crippling food shortage occurred, which led to a spike in the prices of basic commodities. Nearly all government services, including education, healthcare, and shelter and relief, had broken down. The roads and waterways to the capital were blocked by the rebels, increasing the city's plight. Desertions in the Cambodian army were widespread. In late March 1975, the remaining loyal government forces made a last stand as the numerically superior Khmer Rouge fought its way into the city. In the next few days, top Cambodian government officials and the remaining U.S. personnel fled the country. On April 17, 1975, Phnom Penh fell to the Khmer Rouge, which shortly thereafter formed the communist government under Pol Pot.